My name is Jenny Chen, and in the restaurant business, success isn't just about fancy ingredients or prime locations. It's about soul. Something my mother-in-law, Margaret Wong, never understood, even as she built Golden Dragon restaurants into a 30-location chain. You started as a waitress, she loved reminding me during family dinners. Don't forget that. I hadn't forgotten. How could I? Those years of serving tables at the original Golden Dragon had taught me everything about the restaurant business, from the front line, where real success or failure is determined. What Margaret never knew was that her son Michael hadn't married just a waitress. I'd been a culinary prodigy, trained in both classical French cuisine and traditional Chinese cooking. But more importantly, I was the granddaughter of Chef James Chen, whose secret recipes had made the original Golden Dragon famous. My grandfather had been Margaret's first chef, back when she had just one small restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown. His Hong Kong-style seafood dishes drew crowds from across the city. Food critics raved about his mysterious dragon sauce, a recipe he never shared with anyone, except me. Recipes are like children, he told me during our secret cooking lessons in his tiny apartment kitchen. You don't give them to someone just because they have money or power. You wait for someone who will love them, nurture them, help them grow. When he passed away, everyone assumed his recipes died with him. Margaret tried desperately to recreate them, hiring chef after chef. None could capture the magic. What she didn't know was that I had them all, written in my grandfather's careful hand, annotated with his special techniques, hidden away in a secret notebook. I met Michael during my first week as a waitress at Golden Dragon. He was doing restaurant inspections for the family business, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the bustling kitchen. The soup dumplings are better at table 7, I told him, noticing his untouched plate. They're using my grandfather's technique. He looked up, surprised. Later, he told me it wasn't just my knowledge of food that attracted him. It was how I treated every customer like family, how I knew every dish's story. We married despite his mother's objections. A waitress, she complained to anyone who would listen. My son could have married a doctor or lawyer. But Michael saw something in me she didn't. When he promoted me to manager of the original Golden Dragon, profits doubled within a year. It's her connection with the customers, the staff would say. She knows exactly what they want before they do. What they didn't know was that I was slowly, carefully introducing my grandfather's recipes, a special sauce here, a modified cooking technique there. Small changes that made huge differences. The restaurant's reputation soared. Food critics returned, writing about the revival of a San Francisco legend. Other locations in the chain started asking for our recipes. That's when Margaret's attitude changed, but not in the way I'd hoped. We need to standardize, she announced at a family dinner. All locations should have the same menu, same recipes. The original Golden Dragon will adapt to the chain standards. But our customers come for the authentic dishes, I protested. The traditional recipes are outdated, she cut in. We're modernizing, streamlining. And you, she smiled coldly, will step down as manager. We need someone with real business experience. Michael started to object, but I squeezed his hand under the table. Sometimes silence is more powerful than argument. The next day, Margaret installed her nephew, Peter, as the new manager. His first act was to demand all my recipes and cooking notes. Company property, he said with a smirk. I handed over a stack of papers, standard recipes, nothing special. The real treasure, my grandfather's notebook, was safely hidden away. Over the next 3 months, I watched as they systematically destroyed everything that made the original Golden Dragon special. Fresh ingredients were replaced with frozen. Traditional cooking methods were abandoned for faster, cheaper techniques. The soul of the restaurant was being stripped away. The customers noticed. Regular patrons stopped coming. Reviews turned negative. But Margaret was too focused on her standardization plan to see the damage. Then came the announcement. Golden Dragon was going public. Margaret had arranged for a major restaurant conglomerate to buy a controlling interest. We'll be nationwide within 5 years, she boasted at the board meeting. Hundreds of locations, all perfectly standardized. The other board members applauded. Only Michael looked troubled. And to ensure smooth transition, Margaret continued, looking directly at me. We'll be removing all unprofessional elements from management, starting with our former waitress. I stood up calmly. Of course, I understand. You'll sign an agreement naturally. Non-compete, Non-disclosure. Standard terms. I smiled, thinking of my grandfather's notebook, of all the secrets it contained. Of course. Later that night, Michael found me in our home kitchen cooking. "I'm sorry," he said. "Mom's wrong about this. About you." I stirred the sauce I was making, my grandfather's famous dragon sauce. The one that had launched the original Golden Dragon to fame. "Your mother thinks she owns the heart of Golden Dragon," I said quietly, "but she only owns the name." "What are you going to do?" I tasted the sauce. Perfect, just like my grandfather had taught me. "Tomorrow," I said, "we're going to learn the difference between owning a restaurant chain and owning what makes it special." Michael looked at the sauce, then at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The real recipes," he whispered. "You have them." I nodded. "And tomorrow, when your mother signs that deal with the conglomerate, she's going to learn exactly what she's really buying." The sauce simmered, filling the kitchen with its legendary aroma. Somewhere, I imagined my grandfather smiling. Tomorrow would change everything. Not just for me, but for the true legacy of Golden Dragon. The day of the Golden Dragon's public acquisition started with an unexpected phone call. David Chang, the food critic who had first made the restaurant famous 30 years ago, wanted to meet. "I heard about the sale," he said, "and about the changes they're making to the original location. Please tell me you saved your grandfather's recipes." We met at his favorite dim sum place, far from any Golden Dragon location. I brought a small container of sauce. David's eyes widened at the first taste. "It's exactly the same," he whispered. "James Chen's dragon sauce." They said it died with him. "Nothing dies if you pass it on with love," I said, quoting my grandfather. His article was published online an hour before the Golden Dragon's acquisition ceremony. "The Soul of Golden Dragon: A Legacy in Peril." It went viral in the food community. I arrived at the ceremony just as Margaret was preparing to sign the final papers. The hotel ballroom was packed with executives, investors, and press. "Today marks a new chapter," Margaret announced from the podium. "Golden Dragon will become a national brand, bringing our authentic Chinese cuisine to every corner of America." I waited until she lifted the pen to sign. "Actually," I said, standing up, "we should discuss what you're really selling." Margaret's pen froze. "Security." "Before you call security," I continued calmly, "you might want to read David Chang's article. It's trending on all the food sites." Someone pulled it up on their phone. The article spread through the crowd like wildfire, phones pinging everywhere. "The famous dragon sauce," I continued as Margaret's face paled. "The special dumplings, the seafood preparations that made Golden Dragon famous, none of those belong to the company. They never did." "That's ridiculous," Margaret snapped. "All recipes developed at Golden Dragon are company property." I pulled out my grandfather's notebook. "These recipes were created by Chef James Chen long before Golden Dragon existed. He passed them to me, his granddaughter and chosen successor. I've never shared them with the company. I just used them as his heir." The conglomerate's CEO leaned forward. "Is this true?" "Check your due diligence," I suggested. "You'll find no documentation of the original recipes in company records, because they're not company property. They're my family's legacy." Chaos erupted. Lawyers huddled in corners. The CEO demanded an emergency meeting. Margaret looked like she'd swallowed one of her frozen dumplings. I wasn't done. "I'm opening a new restaurant," I announced to the stunned crowd. "Chen's Kitchen. Using all my grandfather's original recipes, plus new ones I've developed, and I've invited all of Golden Dragon's original staff to join me." "You signed a non-compete," Margaret sputtered. Actually, Michael stepped forward, legal papers in hand. "She never signed anything. You were too busy rushing the acquisition to finish the paperwork." The conglomerate's CEO looked physically pained. "Without the original recipes, Golden Dragon is just another chain restaurant," I finished. "With frozen dumplings and standardized sauces, worth maybe a tenth of what you were about to pay." The acquisition collapsed within hours. Golden Dragon's stock price plummeted. Margaret's standardization dream crumbled as investors fled. But I wasn't interested in destruction. I had a restaurant to build. Chen's Kitchen opened 3 months later in the heart of Chinatown, just 2 blocks from the original Golden Dragon. The line on opening day stretched around the block. David Chang's review said it all. "The soul of Golden Dragon lives on, reborn in a new body but carrying the same spirit that made us fall in love 30 years ago." We did things differently. Every chef was trained personally in my grandfather's techniques. Every sauce was made fresh daily. Every customer was treated like family. Michael joined me, leaving his mother's crumbling empire to help build something authentic. I finally understand, he told me. It was never about the number of locations. It was about putting love into every dish. The success was beyond anything Margaret had imagined. Within 2 years, we had 5 locations, not hundreds, but each one special, each one maintaining the highest standards. Celebrity chefs begged for apprenticeships. Food critics called us the most authentic Chinese restaurant chain in America. Margaret tried everything to compete. She hired famous chefs, imported expensive ingredients, even attempted to recreate my grandfather's recipes. Nothing worked. Without the soul, it was just expensive food. Eventually, she came to Chen's kitchen as a customer. I seated her myself. "I don't want your forgiveness," she said stiffly. "I'm not offering it," I replied. "I'm offering you dinner, the way my grandfather would have made it." She cried at the first taste of dragon sauce. "It's exactly like I remember," she whispered, "from the very beginning." Today, Chen's kitchen is renowned not just for its food, but for its philosophy. We grow slowly, train thoroughly, and never compromise on quality. Each location has its own character while maintaining the core traditions my grandfather established. The original notebook sits in a glass case in our flagship restaurant, open to my grandfather's dragon sauce recipe. Next to it is a newer notebook, my own recipes and techniques, developed over years of cooking with love. Margaret still comes in occasionally, always sitting at the same corner table. She's learned to appreciate what she once dismissed: the value of tradition, the importance of soul in cooking. Last week, she brought her granddaughter, who wants to be a chef. "Would you consider teaching her?" Margaret asked quietly. "The real way, like your grandfather taught you?" I looked at the young girl's eager face and remembered my own lessons in that tiny apartment kitchen. "Recipes are like children," I said, quoting my grandfather once again. "They need love to grow." The girl starts her apprenticeship next month. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying what others build. It's about building something better yourself. My grandfather understood that. He didn't just leave me recipes, he left me a philosophy about food, about business, about life. Success isn't measured in numbers of locations or size of profits. It's measured in the smiles of satisfied customers, in the pride of well-trained chefs, in the preservation of traditions that deserve to live on. As I write this from my office above Chen's kitchen, I can smell the dragon sauce simmering below. The same sauce that launched a legacy, that taught a lesson about the true value of tradition. Margaret learned that you can own a restaurant chain without owning its soul. I learned that sometimes the best response to dismissal isn't argument, it's excellence. And somewhere, I know my grandfather is smiling, watching his recipes continue to change lives, one dish at a time. Success in the restaurant business isn't just about the food. It's about knowing when to stay in the kitchen and when to step into the spotlight. I learned this lesson from my father, though not in the way my in-laws might think. My name is Lisa Chin, and for the past 5 years, my mother-in-law, Helen Zhang, has been telling everyone who'll listen about her daughter-in-law's quaint little failure of a restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown. What she doesn't know is that I own the fastest-growing luxury Asian fusion restaurant chain in North America. It started 10 years ago, when I graduated from the Culinary Institute of America. Instead of taking prestigious offers from Michelin-starred restaurants, I decided to help my father run his small traditional Chinese restaurant, Golden Palace. The place was nothing special from the outside, just another mom-and-pop shop in Chinatown with fading red lanterns and worn menus. "Why waste your education?" Helen would say during family gatherings at her mansion in Pacific Heights. "My son married a chef, and she can't even succeed at that." My husband Michael, a successful architect, would squeeze my hand under the table but stay silent. His mother's approval meant everything to him, and she knew it. What no one in the family knew was that Golden Palace was just the test kitchen for something much bigger. Every night, after the regular service ended, I experimented with fusion recipes that combined my classical French training with my father's traditional Chinese techniques. We served these special dishes to a carefully selected clientele: food critics, restaurant investors, and social media influencers who didn't know each other but all thought they discovered a secret menu. Word spread quietly but steadily. Soon, mysterious investors were approaching us about expansion opportunities. But I had learned from watching my in-laws' real estate empire: Growing too fast could mean losing control. Instead, I created Golden Dragon Hospitality Group under my grandmother's maiden name, Lin. As far as anyone knew, Golden Dragon was owned by a reclusive Hong Kong restaurant mogul who never gave interviews. The company began opening high-end restaurants in major cities: Vancouver, Los Angeles, New York. Each one was an instant success, with month-long waiting lists and glowing reviews. I ran everything from my tiny office above Golden Palace, using video calls and a trusted team of managers. My father helped me maintain the secret, proud to see me building something on my own terms. "Let them underestimate you," he'd say in Mandarin, smiling as he chopped vegetables. "The best recipes are the ones that surprise at the perfect moment." The Zhang family, meanwhile, was expanding their luxury hotel business. Helen and her husband Peter had built Zhang Hospitality into one of the largest hotel groups on the West Coast. Their crown jewel project was the upcoming Golden Bay Hotel in San Francisco, a billion-dollar property aimed at ultra-wealthy Asian tourists. At family dinners, they loved to remind everyone of their success. "We've already pre-sold the penthouse units," Helen would boast, "and we're in talks with all the top restaurants for our dining venues." I knew they were struggling with those restaurant deals. Their first-choice tenants had all signed exclusive contracts with Golden Dragon Group instead, though they didn't know I was behind that yet. Last week, everything came to a head at the monthly family dinner. Helen was particularly smug, having just returned from a trip to New York where she dined at the newest Golden Dragon restaurant. "Now that's what a successful restaurant looks like," she declared, looking pointedly at me. "Not some little Chinatown takeout place. I've tried to get them for our hotel, but they're very exclusive. Only work with the best." "How did you like the red chili oil dumplings?" I asked quietly. They were my signature dish, a recipe that had taken years to perfect. "Divine. The owner is clearly a genius, not some pretend chef-playing restaurant." I smiled and excused myself early, citing prep work for the next day. Behind me, I heard Helen telling Michael for the 100th time that he should encourage me to sell Golden Palace and get a real job. What they didn't know was that I had spent the last year secretly preparing for the perfect moment. Golden Dragon Group had acquired every major restaurant space within a 5-block radius of their new hotel. We bought out leases, outbid competitors, and structured deals that gave us complete control of the high-end dining scene in the area. The Zhang's Golden Bay Hotel was scheduled to open in 1 month. They were counting on their restaurants to attract the wealthy clientele they needed. But they were about to learn that in the hospitality business, location isn't everything, timing is. I drove home that night in my modest Toyota, while the Zhangs all drove luxury cars, thinking about the letter sitting in my office safe. It was from Golden Dragon Group to Zhang Hospitality, ready to be delivered at exactly the right moment. My father called as I was getting home. "Is it time?" he asked in Mandarin. "Almost," I replied. "They're about to learn that the little Chinatown restaurant they've been mocking is just the tip of a very large iceberg." The morning of the Golden Bay Hotel's grand opening dawned clear and bright. From my office above Golden Palace, I watched the final preparations through binoculars. Workers hanging banners, valets and crisp uniforms practicing their bows, Helen John directing everything like a general before battle. I knew she was nervous, though she'd never show it. The hotel's success depended on its dining venues, and all their first-choice restaurants had mysteriously declined. They'd had to settle for second-tier options, and advance bookings were disappointing. At precisely 9 a.m., my assistant delivered an envelope to the hotel's management office. By 9:15, Helen was frantically calling Michael. "Your wife needs to come to the hotel immediately," she demanded. "It's an emergency." I took my time driving over, parking my Toyota between Maseratis and Bentleys. The hotel lobby was spectacular, all marble and crystal with a 3-story waterfall. Helen was waiting by the elevators, her perfect makeup barely hiding her agitation. "Do you know anything about this?" She thrust a letter at me. It was from Golden Dragon Group, announcing their acquisition of all restaurant leases in the surrounding blocks. "They're going to strangle our business before we even open." I took the letter, pretending to read it carefully. Interesting timing. Interesting? It's a disaster. Our hotel restaurants are already struggling, and now every decent restaurant nearby will be our direct competition. She paced frantically. "Peter's trying to contact their CEO, but no one can reach them. They're represented by some law firm that won't tell us anything." Maybe I can help, I said quietly. Helen laughed bitterly. You? What could you possibly do? This is real business, not some little dumpling shop. Actually, I pulled out my phone and opened my private email. I could call Christine Wang at Golden Dragon right now. She handles their operations. You know their operations manager. How? Because I hired her. I showed Helen my email signature. Lucy Lin, CEO, Golden Dragon Hospitality Group. Or more accurately, I am her boss. The silence that followed was deafening. Helen stared at my phone, then at me, then back at the phone. That's impossible. Golden Dragon is owned by a reclusive Hong Kong restaurateur. I smiled. That was a convenient story. I've been running Golden Dragon Group since I founded it 5 years ago. Every restaurant, every lease, every acquisition. All me. She sank into a lobby chair, her world visibly tilting on its axis. But your little restaurant. Golden Palace is my test kitchen, where I develop new recipes, train chefs, perfect techniques. Those red chili oil dumplings you loved in New York? I created them in that little dumpling shop you love to mock. Peter Zhang burst out of the elevator, followed by their lawyers. Helen, the situation is worse than we thought. Golden Dragon owns everything within. He stopped short when he saw me. Helen was still staring at my phone, which now displayed Golden Dragon's complete portfolio, 37 restaurants across North America, with 12 more in development. Hello, Peter, I said calmly. I believe we should discuss your hotel's dining options. The next hour was surreal. In the hotel's main conference room, I laid out 2 options for the Zhangs. Option 1, Golden Dragon would open competing restaurants in all our nearby locations, effectively ensuring the hotel's dining venues would fail. Or option 2, I continued, Golden Dragon takes over all your hotel's restaurant spaces. We bring our reputation, our chefs, our waiting lists. We turn Golden Bay into the city's premier dining destination. You planned this all along, Helen whispered. All those years pretending to be. I learned from watching you, I replied. You taught me that perception is power. I just chose to be underestimated rather than overexposed. Peter, ever the businessman, was already calculating. Your terms? Standard management contract, but with one condition. I smiled at Helen. You both have to come eat at Golden Palace. At the family table, in the kitchen where I first learned to cook. The lawyers spent the next few days working out details, but the deal was done. Golden Dragon would operate all dining venues in the Golden Bay Hotel, instantly making it the hottest reservation in town. That Sunday, Helen and Peter came to Golden Palace for dinner. I seated them at the small table in the kitchen where my father and I had planned everything years ago. She watched in silence as I cooked, finally seeing what had been in front of her all along. Why didn't you tell us? She asked eventually. Would you have believed me, or would you have tried to take control, like you do with everything else? The next family dinner was different. Helen was subdued, watching me with new eyes. The other relatives, who had finally learned the truth about Golden Dragon, weren't sure whether to be apologetic or opportunistic. Michael found me in our home kitchen that night. You know what's funny? He said, hugging me from behind. Mom keeps asking herself how she missed it, but she never actually asked you about your work. Not once in 5 years. Golden Bay Hotel became a massive success, largely due to its restaurants. Hotel guests have to book dining reservations months in advance. The waiting list for my chef's table is over a year long. I still run Golden Palace, still develop new recipes in its kitchen, but now Helen comes by sometimes, sitting quietly at that kitchen table, watching me work. Slowly, she's learning that success doesn't always wear designer clothes or drive luxury cars. Last week, she brought her granddaughter, my daughter Amy, to the kitchen. Teach her, Helen said simply. Teach her to build something of her own. I smiled and handed Amy an apron. Some recipes, after all, are worth passing down. The Toyota still sits in my parking spot at Golden Dragon's corporate headquarters. The valets have learned not to question it, just like they've learned not to judge success by its cover. Yesterday, a young chef came to me for advice about starting her own restaurant. As we talked in the Golden Palace kitchen, I thought about perception and power, about quiet success and loud failure. Build something real, I told her. The recognition will come when it matters. Golden Dragon continues to grow, but its heart remains in that small Chinatown kitchen where it all began. Every new chef we hire trains there first. learning that the most important ingredient in success is patience. And Helen, she finally learned that sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones you've been underestimating all along. After all, in business as in cooking, timing is everything. And revenge, like the perfect dumpling, is best served at exactly the right moment. The crystal glasses clinked as Caroline Blackwood, my mother-in-law, raised her hand to silence the dinner conversation. Her pearls gleamed under the chandelier light, matching her perfectly coiffed silver hair. From my seat at the far end of the mahogany dining table, I could already sense what was coming. "Now that we're all here," she announced, her voice carrying that distinctive tone of aristocratic authority, "I have exciting news. Sterling National Bank is about to complete its biggest merger in history, $40 million. She paused for effect, her eyes sweeping across our family gathering before deliberately skipping over me. "Of course, as executive vice president, I've been instrumental in making this happen." I took a small sip of wine, letting its warmth calm my nerves. After 5 years of marriage to her son Michael, I'd learned to weather these family dinners at the Blackwood Mansion. They always followed the same script. Caroline showcasing her latest banking triumph while subtly, or not so subtly, reminding everyone that I didn't belong in their world. "That's wonderful, Mother," Michael said from beside me, his hand finding mine under the table. He squeezed it gently, our private signal that meant just ignore it. But tonight would be different. I could feel it in the air, thick with unspoken tensions and old resentments. "Indeed," Caroline continued, swirling her wine. "Which reminds me, Linda dear, how is that little shop of yours doing?" The way she said shop made it sound like a particularly distasteful insect she found in her garden. "The Homestead Boutique is doing well, thank you," I replied evenly, using my business's full name. The small retail store I built from scratch specialized in handcrafted home goods and local artisan pieces. It wasn't Sterling National Bank, but it was mine, built with every penny I'd saved and every lesson I'd learned watching my immigrant parents run their grocery store. Caroline's perfectly lined lips curved into what might generously be called a smile. "How quaint, though I must say, it's rather embarrassing when my friends ask what my daughter-in-law does. She runs a shabby little shop in the old district," isn't exactly what one hopes to say in my position. The table fell silent. Even the usual clink of silverware stopped. Michael tensed beside me, but before he could speak, his mother pressed on, her voice dripping with false concern. "You know, Linda, if you just accepted my offer to help you find a proper position at the bank, you wouldn't have to waste your time with such pedestrian ventures. I deal with real businesses, dear, companies that matter." 5 years of calculated insults of being treated like an unwanted houseguest in my own family crystallized in that moment. I placed my napkin carefully on the table and stood up. "Thank you for dinner, Caroline. But I should go. I have some important business matters to attend to." "Business matters." She laughed, the sound like ice cracking. "At that little shop? Please, Linda, don't be dramatic. Sit down." I smiled, thinking of the documents sitting in my home office safe. Documents that Caroline, for all her banking expertise, had never bothered to investigate. "No, I really must go. But I'm sure tomorrow will be an interesting day at Sterling National. Good luck with the merger." As I walked out, leaving behind Caroline's dismissive laughter and Michael's concerned calls, I felt a strange sense of calm. Tomorrow Caroline Blackwood would learn that sometimes the smallest shops can cast the longest shadows. Back home, in my study, I opened the safe and pulled out a folder marked Sterling Holdings LC. Inside were papers that told a very different story about my shabby little shop. Documents that proved the Homestead Boutique was just the visible tip of a much larger enterprise. You see, what Caroline never bothered to learn was that before I opened my shop, I'd spent 10 years in commercial real estate investment. The boutique was my passion project, yes, but behind it stood a holding company that owned significant shares in several regional banks, including, through a series of careful acquisitions, a 12% stake in Sterling National. And tomorrow, when the merger vote came up, that 12% would be the deciding factor. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. "Mr. Patterson." "Yes, this is Linda Chen. About tomorrow's Sterling National shareholder vote. I've made my decision." As I hung up, I thought about Caroline's words. Companies that matter. Tomorrow, she would learn just how much my little shop mattered. and as I prepared the documents I present at tomorrow's board meeting, I couldn't help but smile, thinking of the look that would cross Caroline's face when she realized who really held the power to approve or deny her precious $40 million merger. Sometimes the smallest businesses cast the longest shadows, and tomorrow, my shadow would reach all the way to Caroline Blackwood's executive suite. The Sterling National Bank boardroom gleamed with old money and new ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city's skyline, while portraits of past bank presidents washed over the proceedings with painted gravity. I sat quietly in the back row of the shareholder section, dressed in a simple black suit that would have earned Caroline's disapproval. My mother-in-law stood at the podium, resplendent in her signature pearl necklace and navy power suit, presenting the merger details to the assembled board members and major shareholders. Her voice carried that familiar tone of absolute authority. "This merger represents a historic opportunity for Sterling National," she declared, clicking through slides of impressive projections and growth charts. "With Meridian Trust's assets and our market position, we're looking at a $40 million deal that will transform regional banking." I glanced at my watch. In exactly 3 minutes, Mr. Patterson, my proxy advisor, would make his entrance. Caroline was just reaching her crescendo. "The shareholder vote is essentially a formality," she said, allowing herself a small, satisfied smile. "We've secured commitments from all major stakeholders. By this afternoon, Sterling National will." The boardroom door opened. Mr. Patterson walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. Caroline paused, annoyance flickering across her carefully composed face. "My apologies for the interruption," Mr. Patterson said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "But before we proceed with the vote, there's a matter of significant shareholder interest that needs to be addressed." Caroline's fingers tightened on the podium. "Mr. Patterson, we're in the middle of. I represent Sterling Holdings LC," he continued smoothly, "which controls 12% of Sterling National's voting shares. My client has some concerns about the proposed merger terms." The room stirred. 12% was enough to swing the vote. Caroline's eyes narrowed as she scanned a document in front of her. "Sterling Holdings. I'm not familiar with." She stopped abruptly, her face paling as Mr. Patterson handed her a folder. "Perhaps this will clarify matters," he said. "Sterling Holdings LC, founded by Linda Chen." Caroline's head snapped up, her eyes finding me in the back row. For the first time in 5 years, I saw something new in her expression. Fear. I stood up slowly, smoothing my jacket. "Hello, Caroline. Shall we discuss those real businesses now?" The next hour was a study in controlled chaos. As Mr. Patterson laid out my concerns about the merger's impact on local lending practices and community investment, Caroline's carefully constructed deal began to unravel. Her allies on the board shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they realized the power dynamics had suddenly changed. "This is absurd," Caroline finally burst out, her composure cracking. "You run a small retail shop. How could you possibly own enough shares to influence Sterling National's biggest merger?" I finished for her, walking to the front of the room. "The same way you built your career, Caroline. Through careful planning, strategic investments," and I paused, letting the irony sink in. "Understanding what really matters in business." I turned to address the board directly. The Homestead Boutique was never my only business interest. While Caroline was dismissing me as a small-time shopkeeper, I was building a diverse investment portfolio. Sterling Holdings LC owns not just shares in this bank, but significant interests in commercial real estate and regional financial institutions across 3 states. Opening my laptop, I projected my own presentation onto the screen. "I have an alternative proposal for the merger, one that preserves local lending authority and maintains community investment requirements." I clicked through detailed financial projections, one that will actually increase shareholder value by 15% over Caroline's plan. The board members leaned forward, their interest piqued. Caroline stood frozen at the podium, watching as her carefully constructed power base shifted beneath her feet. "Mr. Chairman," I concluded, "I move to table the current merger proposal in favor of a more detailed review of both options." The vote wasn't even close. As the boardroom emptied 2 hours later, Caroline remained rooted in place, staring at the documents that had shattered her plans. I approached her quietly. "You know what the saddest part is, Caroline? If you'd ever bothered to really know me, to look past your prejudices about my shabby little shop, you might have found a valuable ally instead of an opponent." She looked up, years of carefully maintained superiority crumbling. "Why didn't you tell us? Tell Michael? Would you have believed me?" I asked simply. "Or would you have seen it as another opportunity to remind me of my place?" The silence between us held years of missed connections and wasted opportunities. Finally, Caroline spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" Now we have a choice. We can continue as adversaries, or I laid my alternative merger proposal on the table between us. We can work together to build something better. Your banking expertise and my investment network could make Sterling National a force for both profit and positive change in the community. She picked up the proposal, reading it with new eyes. "This is actually brilliant," she admitted reluctantly. "I learned from watching my parents' grocery store that real success isn't just about big numbers. It's about understanding your community, building relationships, and creating value that lasts." I smiled slightly. Even a shabby little shop can teach those lessons. Caroline nodded slowly, a glimmer of respect finally showing in her eyes. "I may have misjudged some things. Maybe we both did," I offered. "Dinner at my house next week. We can discuss the merger details and maybe start over." That evening, as I closed up the Homestead Boutique, I ran my hand along the handcrafted wooden shelves my father had helped me install. The shop's warm lighting illuminated local artworks and carefully curated home goods. It wasn't Sterling National Bank, but it was the heart of everything I built. Michael was waiting outside, leaning against his car. "So," he said, pulling me into a hug, "my wife's secretly a financial mogul." I laughed against his chest. "Your wife is someone who learned that true worth isn't always visible on the surface." I looked up at him. "Are you angry I didn't tell you?" He shook his head, smiling. "Proud, actually. Though I would have loved to see Mother's face when she realized." It was memorable, I admitted. But you know what's even better? I think for the first time she actually saw me, really saw me. As we drove home, I thought about Caroline's words from the previous night, companies that matter. She'd been right about one thing: size and appearance don't determine what matters. Sometimes the most important changes start in the smallest places, like a family grocery store or a shabby little shop that harbored bigger dreams. The merger eventually went through, restructured to balance profit with community impact. Caroline and I developed an unexpected partnership, combining her old-school banking prowess with my community-focused investment approach. The Homestead Boutique remained my heart, but now it was just one part of a larger legacy, proof that success comes in many forms, and that true worth lies not in appearances, but in the foundations we build and the changes we inspire. Every morning, as I unlock the shop's door, I smile at the small plaque my parents gave me when I first opened. The mightiest trees grow from the smallest seeds. Caroline passes by sometimes on her way to the bank, stopping in to chat or discuss business. She's different now, we both are. We've learned that real power isn't about putting others in their place, but about helping everyone find where they truly belong. And as for that shabby little shop, it's still here, still growing, still proving that sometimes the smallest businesses cast the longest shadows and shine the brightest lights. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and I never thought I'd be in the middle of the biggest property scandal Newport, Rhode Island had seen in a century. But when you marry into old money, you learn that some families will do anything to keep their wealth and their secrets. The Blackwood family had ruled Newport's social scene since the Gilded Age. Their summer cottage, really a 30-room mansion overlooking the Atlantic, was the crown jewel of Bellevue Avenue. When their only son Thomas fell in love with me, a mere historical preservation specialist from the Newport Historical Society, his parents were less than thrilled. "At least she has some appreciation for history," Victoria Blackwood had said during our first meeting, examining me like I was an artifact of questionable provenance. If only she'd known then just how much that appreciation would cost her. The small beach house that started everything had been in my family for generations. Nothing fancy, just a weathered 2-story cottage with wraparound porches and salt-sprayed windows, sitting on 3 acres of pristine oceanfront property. My great-grandfather, a ship captain, had bought it in 1925 for a song, back when that stretch of coast was considered too remote to be valuable. Now that same worthless stretch was prime real estate, worth millions per acre. The Blackwoods had been trying to buy up the entire coastline for their latest development project, a luxury resort that would restore Newport to its former glory. As my father-in-law Charles loved to say, my beach house was the last holdout, a stubborn reminder that not everything in Newport was for sale. At least that's what I thought until Thomas lost everything in a series of disastrous investments. "It's not your fault, darling," I'd said, holding him as he confessed how badly he'd screwed up. "We'll figure something out." But the Blackwoods had already figured it out. They knew their son's weakness for risky ventures had probably encouraged it. Now they had the leverage they needed. The family dinner was set for a Friday evening at Marble House, their summer mansion. Everything about it felt wrong from the moment we arrived. The butler directed me to sit at the far end of the massive dining table, separated from Thomas by the length of polished mahogany. "Rebecca, dear," Victoria began, her voice dripping with false concern. "We need to discuss Thomas's situation." Charles didn't bother with pleasantries. He pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. "Your husband owes $2.7 million to some very impatient people. People who aren't as understanding as family." My hands shook slightly as I opened the folder. Inside were loan documents, investment records, and finally, a deed transfer for my beach house. "The property is worth at least $5 million, Victoria added, as if she were doing me a favor. "Sign it over, and we'll clear Thomas's debts." "Refuse?" She glanced meaningfully at her son, who wouldn't meet my eyes. "You'll make sure he divorces me," I finished quietly, "and I suppose these impatient people would make his life very difficult." Charles smiled thinly. "You always were clever, Rebecca. Perhaps too clever for your own good." I looked at Thomas, still staring at his plate. 5 years of marriage, of love and trust, crumbling in a single evening. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent those 5 years doing more than just playing the dutiful daughter-in-law. Working at the Historical Society had its advantages. I'd seen the original property surveys, the old maps that the town's founding families thought were safely buried in archives. I knew secrets about the Newport coastline that even the Blackwoods, with all their generations of wealth, didn't know. "May I at least pack up my family's belongings?" I asked, signing the transfer with steady hands. "Of course, dear," Victoria purred. "Take the weekend. We'll start demolition on Monday." I drove home alone that night, leaving Thomas to celebrate with his parents. The beach house was dark when I arrived, but I didn't need light to find what I was looking for. In my grandfather's old study, behind a loose panel of weathered wainscoting, lay the true treasure of the property, documents that would shake the Blackwoods empire to its foundations. My great-grandfather hadn't just bought a beach house in 1925. He'd bought something far more valuable, something the original owners had desperately tried to hide. And on Monday, when the Blackwoods demolition crew arrived, they would find out exactly what they'd taken from the wrong person. I spent that weekend methodically preparing, just as I had been for the past 5 years. Every document was copied and securely stored. Every piece of evidence carefully cataloged. I'd learned from the Blackwoods themselves that power isn't just about money. It's about knowing when and how to use what you know. Sunday night, as I packed the last box into my car, I took one final walk along the beach. The waves crash against the shore, constant and eternal, just as they had when my great-grandfather first bought this land. He'd known its true value wasn't in the building or even the location. The real value lay beneath the surface, in secrets that had been waiting nearly a century to be revealed. Monday morning would change everything. And as I drove away from my family home for what the Blackwoods thought was the last time, I smiled, thinking of Victoria's smug face at dinner. She'd been right about one thing. I did have an appreciation for history. What she hadn't realized was that history had a way of coming back to haunt those who tried to bury it. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. I sat in my car across from the beach house, watching the Blackwoods demolition crew arrive. Victoria and Charles were there too, of course. They never missed a chance to gloat. I could see Victoria gesturing grandly, probably already planning where their luxury resort's main entrance would be. At exactly 9:00 a.m., just as Charles was raising a ceremonial sledgehammer for the cameras, 3 black SUVs pulled up. The men and women who stepped out weren't construction workers or reporters. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. A tall woman in a dark suit flashed her credentials. "I'm Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI Historical Artifacts Division. This property has been designated a protected historical site. All demolition activities need to cease immediately. The look on Victoria's face was worth every moment of the past 5 years. You see, what my great-grandfather Captain James Henderson bought in 1925 wasn't just oceanfront property. He purchased something the original owners, the Blackwood's own ancestors, had desperately tried to keep hidden. Proof of one of the largest historical art thefts in American history. During World War II, countless European art treasures were smuggled to America for safekeeping. Most were returned after the war, but some, particularly those belonging to Jewish families who didn't survive the Holocaust, mysteriously disappeared. The original Blackwood patriarch, Theodore Blackwood, had built a sophisticated underground vault system beneath the coastline, using it to store and later sell priceless artworks. My great-grandfather discovered this by accident while renovating the beach house. Instead of exposing the truth, he documented everything meticulously, knowing the time would come when this information would be crucial. "This is absurd," Charles sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "We have all the proper permits." "Actually," I said, stepping forward with a thick folder, "you don't." The original 1925 property survey, which I recently submitted to the Historical Society's archives, shows extensive underground structures that were never included in any subsequent property records. Agent Martinez nodded. Structures that match the descriptions of storage facilities used in one of the largest art theft operations of the 1940s. Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You have no proof." "Oh, but I do," I interrupted softly. "My great-grandfather kept very detailed records. Photographs, shipping manifests, even letters from your grandfather, Theodore Blackwood, discussing how to handle inquiries from Holocaust survivors' families about their missing collections." The next few hours were chaos. As FBI agents swarmed the property with ground-penetrating radar equipment, I sat in Agent Martinez's vehicle, explaining everything. How I discovered my great-grandfather's documents shortly after marrying Thomas. How I'd spent years quietly verifying every detail, building an ironclad case. How I'd waited, knowing the Blackwoods would eventually show their true colors. The vault network extends under multiple properties along the coast, I explained, spreading out the old surveys. The beach house was just the access point. That's why they were so desperate to get this particular piece of land. By afternoon, the story had broken nationally. FBI uncovers World War II art theft ring in Newport Mansion, screamed the headlines. Reporters swarmed Bellevue Avenue as agents carried box after box of documents from the Blackwood mansion. Thomas found me that evening, sitting on the beach house's porch swing. He looked lost, younger somehow, without his family's wealth and influence to shield him. "Did you know?" he asked quietly. "When you married me, did you know about all this?" I shook my head. "I discovered it after. I kept hoping you'd prove to be different from them. That's why I waited so long to come forward." He sat beside me, watching the waves. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for being too weak to stand up to them. For letting them manipulate me. I know, and I did know. Thomas had been as much a victim of his family's toxic legacy as anyone." "What will you do now?" "Cooperate with the investigation," he said firmly. "It's time the truth came out. All of it." Over the next year, the full scope of the Blackwood art theft operation was revealed. Hundreds of artworks, worth billions, were recovered and returned to the descendants of their rightful owners. Charles and Victoria, along with several other wealthy Newport families implicated in the scheme, faced federal charges. The beach house was indeed declared a historical site, but not for its architecture. It became a memorial and museum dedicated to telling the story of the stolen art and the families who had lost so much. I stayed on as its historical director, working with Holocaust survivor groups to ensure their stories were properly told. Thomas and I separated amicably. He moved to Boston, started over in a regular job, and began the long process of becoming his own person outside his family's shadow. We still talk occasionally. Healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds. As for the Blackwood's luxury resort plans, the entire stretch of coastline was eventually designated as protected land, its underground vaults carefully preserved as historical evidence. Victoria's dream of restoring Newport to its former glory died alongside the family's carefully constructed reputation. Last week, I found a new document while organizing my great-grandfather's papers. It was a letter he'd written but never sent, dated 1946. To whoever finds these records, I couldn't stop what happened, but I could make sure the truth survived. Sometimes justice takes time, but history has a way of emerging when it's most needed. Guard these secrets well and use them wisely. I did use them wisely, Grandpa, not for revenge, but for justice. Not to destroy, but to restore. Now, when I sit on my porch swing watching the sunset, I think about power, not the kind that comes from money or social status, but the kind that comes from knowing the truth and having the patience to wait for the right moment to reveal it. Victoria was right about one thing. I do have an appreciation for history. What she never understood was that history isn't just about preserving the past. It's about learning from it, making amends for it, and sometimes using it to right ancient wrongs. The beach house still stands, its weathered shingles and salt-sprayed windows telling a story far different from what anyone could have imagined. It's no longer just my family's home. It's a testament to the fact that truth, like the tide, cannot be held back forever. And sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't gold or artwork or oceanfront property. Sometimes they're the simple things: truth, justice, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. As for me, I'm still here, still telling the story to visitors who come to the museum. Not just the story of the stolen art, but the story of how one family's greed led to their downfall, and how sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's letting the truth finally have its day in the sun. The waves still crash against the shore, constant and eternal, but now they carry a different message. Some things are worth more than money, some secrets are worth keeping until the right time, and some victories are worth waiting generations to achieve. Just ask the Blackwoods, if you can find them in their new, much more modest accommodations. My name is Mai Chen, and this is the story of how my father-in-law's attempt to steal my dream house revealed a historical treasure that would change everything. The Victorian mansion at 47 Maple Grove had been my obsession since I first saw it as an architecture student. Built in 1952 by renowned architect Theodore Hammond, it was his last project and, according to local legend, his masterpiece. But the house had fallen into disrepair over the decades, its grandeur fading behind overgrown ivy and neglect. When it came up for auction last year, I was ready. 10 years of saving, of building my architectural practice, of waiting for this exact moment. My husband James supported my dream, even though his father, Richard Harrison, thought it was ridiculous. An old house? Richard had scoffed at our family dinner. And you want to restore it? Who would trust a foreign architect with an American historic property? I'd learned to ignore such comments from my father-in-law. As one of Boston's elite real estate developers, he believed history was something to be bulldozed and replaced with luxury condos. The fact that his son had married a Chinese-American architect who believed in preservation was a constant source of irritation. But I won the auction. The house was mine, and with it, a chance to restore Hammond's forgotten masterpiece to its former glory. The problem started 3 months into the restoration. I'd been meticulously documenting everything, photographing each room, researching period details. That's when I found the first anomaly, a wall that shouldn't have been there according to the city's plans. The blueprints must be wrong, James suggested when I showed him. But I knew better. Theodore Hammond was famous for his precision, his attention to detail. His blueprints were never wrong. I hired ground-penetrating radar specialists to examine the house's structure. Their findings were puzzling. There were spaces in the walls that didn't appear on any official plans, rooms that seemed to exist but had no entrances. Then came the Historical Society's interest. Maria Santos, their lead researcher, was as intrigued as I was. Hammond's personal papers suggest this wasn't just a house, she explained, showing me letters we'd uncovered. He designed it for someone specific, someone who needed special features. The more we dug, the more mysterious the house became, and the more nervous Richard Harrison got. It started with friendly offers to buy the property. Then came suggestions that the restoration was too expensive, that I was risking James's financial future. Finally, he showed his true hand. The city's rezoning this area, he announced one evening, arriving unannounced at our temporary apartment. Prime location for my new development project. 40 luxury units. The old house has to go. I refused to sell. That's when he played his final card. James, he said, turning to my husband, it's time to choose. Your inheritance or your wife's foolish dream? I watched my husband's face pale. The Harrison family money was substantial, and Richard had always used it as a leash to control his children. But what Richard didn't know was that I discovered something in the house's hidden spaces, something that made his threats meaningless. 2 days earlier, Maria and I had found a hidden door behind the library's oak paneling. Behind it was a room that didn't exist on any official plans, and inside that room was a safe containing Theodore Hammond's personal documents about the house. The truth was astonishing. The mansion hadn't just been Hammond's last project. It had been built as a safe house for the Underground Railroad, designed with hidden rooms and escape routes that were still intact. The 1952 construction had been a careful preservation of the original 1850 structure, disguised as a new build to protect its secrets. The Historical Society was already preparing the paperwork for National Historic Landmark status. Once approved, the house would be protected from any development. But before we could file the paperwork, Richard made his move. "Sign this," he demanded, throwing a document on our table. "Sell the house to my development company for $1, or James loses everything. His inheritance, his position in the family business, everything." I looked at James, saw the conflict in his eyes. "It's not worth losing your family over," he whispered. So I signed. Richard's triumphant smile as he clutched the paper was almost comical. He didn't even bother to read the full document, too eager to claim his victory. "Clear out your things by Monday," he ordered. "The demolition crew arrives Tuesday." After he left, James turned to me in despair. "I'm so sorry, May. I never thought he'd go this far." I hugged him, smiling despite everything. "Don't worry, your father really should learn to read contracts more carefully." Because what Richard didn't know was that I'd sold him more than just a house. I'd sold him a historical landmark application already in process, a property about to become federally protected, and evidence of his own attempted fraud in trying to destroy a critical piece of American history. Monday was going to be very interesting indeed. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. I stood on the mansion's front steps with Maria Santos and a team from the Historical Society, watching Richard Harrison's Mercedes pull up to the curb. His demolition crew waited in their trucks behind him, ready to begin destroying history. "What's all this?" Richard demanded, stalking up the walkway. "I thought I told you to clear out." Actually, Maria stepped forward. "Mrs. Chen invited us to document the official declaration of 47 Maple Grove as a National Historic Landmark." Richard's face reddened. "What are you talking about? I own this property." "Yes," I agreed pleasantly, "you do. Congratulations on purchasing one of the most significant Underground Railroad sites in New England." I handed him a thick folder containing Hammond's original documents, the Historical Society's findings, and most importantly, the federal protection order that had been expedited once we'd proven the house's historical significance. "This is impossible," Richard sputtered, flipping through the pages. "The house was built in 1952. "That's what Theodore Hammond wanted everyone to believe," Maria explained. "But the original structure dates to 1850. Hammond's 1952 construction was actually a brilliant preservation project designed to protect the house's secrets." As if on cue, a line of cars pulled up. Local news vans, Preservation Society members, and most devastating for Richard, his biggest competitors in the real estate market, all eager to witness this historic moment. "You can't do this," Richard hissed at me. "We have a contract." "Yes, we do," I smiled. "A contract for the sale of a historic property, which you signed without reading the full disclosure addendum. The one that detailed the house's historical status application and your legal obligations as its new owner." James, who had been quietly watching, stepped forward. "It's over, Dad. You wanted the house? Now you have it, and all the responsibilities that come with it." Those responsibilities were substantial. As the owner of a National Historic Landmark, Richard was now legally obligated to preserve and maintain the property according to strict federal guidelines. Any alterations required extensive approval, and demolition was completely forbidden. The news cameras rolled as Maria led the first official tour of the house, revealing its extraordinary secrets. The hidden rooms that had sheltered escaped slaves. The cleverly designed ventilation systems that carried messages through the walls. The underground tunnel that led to the river, now preserved behind glass panels. "Theodore Hammond was a genius," I explained to the reporters. In 1952, when urban renewal threatened this house, he didn't just save it, he hid it in plain sight. He created a modern facade that protected the original structure, then designed his new house around the historical elements. The story exploded across national media. Hidden history discovered. Underground railroad station preserved in plain sight read the headlines. Architectural magazines clamor for interviews about Hammond's innovative preservation techniques. Historical societies praise the perfect marriage of 1850s courage and 1950s ingenuity. Richard, trapped by his own greed, watched his development dreams crumble. The property he'd schemed to acquire for $1 was now worth millions, but as a museum and historical site, not as real estate. The final blow came from his own board of directors. They saw an opportunity in this PR disaster. Think about it, his CEO suggested. Harrison Development, protector of historical treasures. We could renovate the carriage house into a visitor center, sponsor educational programs. The publicity would be worth more than any luxury condo project. 6 months later, I stood in Theodore Hammond's hidden library, now restored to its original glory, watching visitors marvel at the architectural details I'd helped preserve. The house had become a symbol of both historical resistance and modern preservation. Richard, surprisingly, had embraced his new role as custodian of history, after his board made it clear his position depended on it. He even funded a scholarship for architectural students focusing on historical preservation. "You knew this would happen," James said one evening as we watched the sunset from the house's restored Widow's Walk. "When you signed that contract, you knew exactly how it would play out." I smiled, remembering Hammond's words in his personal journal, which we'd found in the hidden safe. Architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about protecting the stories our walls have witnessed, the truths they've sheltered, the lives they've saved. The house continues to reveal its secrets. Each restoration project uncovers new details about its role in history. Descendants of people who passed through its hidden rooms during their journey to freedom have come forward with stories preserved in family histories. We maintained our apartment in the renovated carriage house, where I run my architectural practice specializing in historical preservation. The firm's reputation soared after the Hammond House discovery, and we now consult on preservation projects across the country. Richard and I have reached an understanding of sorts. He's learned that not all value can be measured in square footage and profit margins. Sometimes the greatest worth lies in the stories our buildings tell, the histories they preserve, the legacies they protect. Last week, he actually asked my opinion on another historic property his company is considering preserving. "We need to do this right," he said, without a trace of his former condescension. "The history matters." The Hammond House stands proud on Maple Grove, its secrets now celebrated instead of hidden. School groups tour the underground passages, historians study its innovative design, and architecture students sketch its clever solutions to the challenge of hiding freedom seekers in plain sight. As for me, I got my dream house after all, not as an owner, but as its lead preservation architect. Every morning, I walk through its halls, touching the walls that have sheltered so many secrets, feeling the weight of the stories they still have to tell. Theodore Hammond's last project wasn't just a house. It was a bridge between centuries, a testament to the power of architecture to protect not just people, but truth itself. His genius lay not in creating something new, but in preserving something precious in a way that would outlast its enemies. In the end, Richard's attempt to destroy history had only served to protect it. His $1 purchase didn't buy him a development opportunity. It bought him a place in the continuing story of 47 Maple Grove, a story that began with the courage of the Underground Railroad and continues with each new generation that discovers its secrets. The house that was meant to be demolished now stands as a monument to preservation, a reminder that some things are worth more than money, and that the greatest architecture does more than shelter bodies. It protects our shared history and the truths we dare not forget. Every time I see a new visitor's eyes widen as they discover another of the house's secrets, I think of Hammond's words, now engraved on a plaque in the entrance. In architecture, as in life, our greatest achievements are often the truths we protect, the histories we preserve, and the stories we pass on to those who come after us. Richard's dollar bill is framed in the visitor center, a reminder that sometimes the smallest transactions can lead to the biggest transformations, if we're willing to look beyond the surface to the treasures hidden within.